Secret of the World. My name is Jason Hutagalung. If you're here, you're probably like me, curious, restless, hungry for the truths hidden beneath the surface. That curiosity isn't just a spark, it's a fire that drives us to dig deeper, to question everything, and to connect the dots others overlook. This isn't just a podcast. This is a journey, a deep dive into the stories you think you know, the secrets the world tries to bury, and the people who've lived through the unimaginable. It's about struggle, survival, and the human spirit, raw, unfiltered, and unbreakable. Here, we don't just talk about history or events. We unravel the threads that connect us all. Together, we'll step into the lives of those who've walked through fire and lived to tell their story. People like me, people like you. So buckle up, my friend. What you're about to hear will challenge you, inspire you, and maybe even change the way you see the world. This is Secret of the World. Let's begin. Welcome to Secret of the World, where the stories we uncover don't just echo, they demand to be heard. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on a chapter of history that many choose to ignore. Timor-Leste, or as it was known to us in Indonesia, East Timor, a land scarred by conflict where suffering and survival intertwined in ways that still shape lives today. For many Indonesians, the East Timor conflict feels distant, a story buried under years of propaganda, misunderstanding, or indifference. But for those who lived it, the pain remains. The scars aren't just carved into the land, but into the hearts of those who survived, and the shadows of that violence extend far beyond its borders. Before we unravel the story of Hercules, a man forged in the fires of chaos, war, and survival, we must first revisit the soil from which he emerged. His rise wasn't born in Jakarta's streets, but in the bloodied terrain of Timor-Leste, where violence didn't just happen, it became a way of life. This isn't just history. It's a chilling reminder that the children of war don't simply survive. They adapt, transform, and carry forward the echoes of the atrocities inflicted upon them. Violence begets violence, shaping lives and rewriting futures in ways the world too often fails to see. So today, we return to East Timor, to its struggles, its tragedies, and its resilience. Through this journey, we'll trace the path from those dark days to the rise of Hercules, uncovering the threads of power, pain, and survival that bind his story to the wider web of human conflict. Let's begin. My name is Jason Hutagalung, and today we unravel a tale that feels as though it's been pulled straight from the script of Scarface. But this isn't Miami. This is Southeast Asia, a region caught in the throes of Cold War politics, where ideologies clashed and the scars of propaganda, communism, and Western meddling shaped entire generations. Our story takes us to the shadowy world of Hercules, a modern-day Tony Montana. Like the fictional Scarface, Hercules rose from the chaos of a broken world, carving out a path of survival, power, and infamy. But his story isn't just one of a gangster, it's tied to a larger game. One played by superpowers, each vying for control over a world gripped by fear of communism and the thirst for dominance. Narrative tie-in, the global context of Hercules' rise. In the mid to late 20th century, the Cold War wasn't just a battle of ideologies, it was a battle of proxies, and Southeast Asia became one of its most brutal theaters. For Indonesia, the 1965 anti-communist purge, fueled by Western propaganda and local military ambitions, left more than 1 million dead. It wasn't just an ideological cleansing. It was the beginning of an era where fear and power dictated the rules. Hercules was born into this chaos. A young man from Timor-Leste, a region ravaged by Indonesia's annexation in the 1970s, he grew up witnessing how propaganda turned neighbors into enemies, and how the powerful used fear to control the weak. These formative years parallel the story of Tony Montana, shaped by his own war-torn past in Cuba, thrust into a world of crime, survival, and power in America. But Hercules' rise wasn't just about himself. It was part of a much larger web. The Indonesian military, armed militias, and the shadow of Western influence lie all converging to create an ecosystem of violence, corruption, and survival. Propaganda, politics, and the cost of power. Much like Tony Montana's ascent in Scarface, Hercules' story is one of raw ambition colliding with a brutal reality. But where Tony's empire was built on the cocaine trade and Miami's criminal underworld, Hercules operated in a landscape shaped by Cold War geopolitics. Timor-Leste's bloody annexation by Indonesia was justified by anti-communist rhetoric, a narrative backed by the United States, which saw any communist foothold in Southeast Asia as a threat. But as the bullets flew and the villages burned, it wasn't communism or democracy being defended, it was power. Hercules, caught in the middle of this ideological storm, rose not as a symbol of either side, but as a man determined to survive. He joined the pro-Indonesian militias, not out of loyalty to the cause, but out of necessity. Just as Tony Montana said, in this country you gotta make the money first. Then when you get the money, you get the power. Then when you get the power, you get the women. For Hercules, it was survival first, then the power, then Auro, the legend. Hercules' story is more than just a gangster's tale. It's a window into the brutal reality of geopolitics, propaganda, and the human cost of power struggles. Much like Tony Montana, he rose from nothing, navigating a world where morality is a luxury and survival demands ruthless pragmatism. But here's the question. Is Hercules a villain, a hero, or just a man shaped by his circumstances? Is his story one of triumph or tragedy? The Valley of Widows, Crara's Massacre. When the dust settled on the mountains of Vikake in East Timor, it left behind a haunting silence that would forever mark this place as the Valley of Widows. This was Crara's, a small settlement forced into existence by the Indonesian military and later decimated by its own hand. The story begins with the people of Bibileo, a resilient community living beyond the reach of Indonesian control until the late 1970s. Captured and relocated by the military, these people were shuffled like pawns, first to Vikek, then to Crara's in 1981, a settlement meant to serve as a tool of control. The Indonesian army didn't act alone. Timorese civilian units, the Hansip and Rati, were drawn into this deadly machine. Hansip members were armed and paid, while the Rati served without weapons or wages, their loyalty exploited. But cracks began to form. Resentment brewed, especially when some Rati members, stripped of their status, defected to the pro-independence Falentil. Tensions boiled over on the 8th of August 1983 when Falentil and ex-Rati members attacked the Indonesian military post in Crara's, killing 14 soldiers. What followed was not just a military response, it was a campaign of annihilation. On the 7th of September, the Indonesian army arrived in Crara's, setting fire to homes and killing those who remained. But the real horror unfolded in the mountains, where the army hunted down the fleeing residents. On the 16th of September, up to 55 villagers were taken to a pit in Karabalu and executed. The next day, in Tahubane, 141 men were shot dead. The massacre claimed the lives of over 200 civilians, the majority men, leaving behind widows and orphans who would carry the scars of this tragedy for generations. The very land, once a symbol of forced relocation and survival, became a graveyard, a testament to the unchecked brutality of the occupation. This is the untold side of history. It's the story of lives lost, of a community wiped out under the shadow of power and greed. But it's also a story that shaped the identity of those who survived, widows, children, and even figures like Hercules, whose paths were forged in the fires of such unimaginable suffering. After the dust settled on the brutal conflict in Timor-Leste, the scars ran deep, not just on the land, but in the hearts of its people. The survivors of the occupation carried those wounds with them, both visible and invisible. But survival didn't mean peace. It meant living in the shadow of a narrative carefully crafted by those in power. Propaganda became the tool of control. For decades, the Indonesian government fed its people a version of the truth, a truth sanitized, manipulated, and one-sided. Timor-Leste's struggle for independence was painted as rebellion, its people as traitors, and its fighters as terrorists. What wasn't shown were the villages burned to the ground, the families torn apart, and the lives crushed under the weight of military boots. In this chaos, Hercules was born, not just as a man, but as a symbol of survival. A young boy shaped by war, by displacement, by a world where the rules were rewritten every day. He didn't rise with a cause, he rose to survive. And in surviving, he learned the art of propaganda himself. Hercules became a product of both sides, the oppressor and the oppressed. A militia leader tied to the pro-Indonesia side, he played the dangerous game of loyalty and power. In the eyes of some, he was a hero, a protector of unity. In the eyes of others, he was a criminal, a pawn in a bloody game. But what does survival mean when it comes at the cost of identity? How do you navigate a world where propaganda dictates who you are, hero or villain, patriot or traitor? And how does that shape a man like Hercules, whose life became a battlefield of its own? As we peel back the layers of his story, we'll see how survival and propaganda are two sides of the same coin. Hercules' rise wasn't just about strength or cunning, it was about understanding the rules of a broken system and using them to his advantage. Let's continue unraveling this story, one that shows us how the echoes of war shape not just nations, but the individuals who emerge from its ashes. And this podcast is where I uncover stories that are hidden, misunderstood, or forgotten. Stories that connect the world through the threads of power, corruption, survival, and humanity. Today, we dive into a story that mirrors the rise and fall of empires, the shadows of the Cold War, and the human spirit's capacity to endure and adapt. This is the story of Hercules, a man whose name echoes through the underworld of Indonesia and beyond, a man known as the Indonesian Scarface. But this story isn't just about Hercules. It's about the systems that create people like him and the scars they carry. It's about the layers of hell some of us have lived through, and yes, it's about me too. Because to understand Hercules, I need to share my own journey. Together, we'll explore what makes us who we are, what we endure, and what we become. Segment 1, The World That Made Him. Indonesia in the late 20th century was a country shaped by chaos and control. The Cold War left its fingerprints everywhere. Western powers, Asian nations, and even religion itself were weapons in a battle for dominance. In the 1960s, Indonesia became a battleground of ideology, with anti-communist purges claiming over 500,000 lives. Hercules was born into this chaos. From the streets of Timor-Leste to the slums of Jakarta, his early life was a fight for survival. He lost an eye and gained a reputation. Ruthless, resilient, resourceful. But was he born ruthless, or did the world make him that way? I understand this question because I've lived it. I've been in Indonesian prisons where the law was the jungle, where cells meant for 20 men held 40, and survival wasn't just about enduring, it was about adapting. Like Hercules, I learned young that life can be a brutal teacher. Segment 2. The Rise of Hercules. Hercules didn't just survive, he rose. He became a leader in the shadowy underworld of Jakarta, commanding respect and fear in equal measure. Some saw him as a gangster, others as a Robin Hood figure, a man who gave back to his community even as he broke the rules. But power doesn't come without cost. Hercules' ties to Indonesia's elite, including the infamous Kopassus forces and General Prabowo, show how corruption and control intertwine. He wasn't just a criminal, he was part of a system that blurred the lines between legality and illegality. I see parallels here with my own life in Australia as an immigrant, a minority, and someone who's faced the prison system. Different countries, different systems, but the same patterns of power and oppression. Segment 3, Humanity in the Shadows. At his core, Hercules is a product of survival. The question isn't whether his actions were right or wrong, it's whether he had a choice. When the world takes everything from you, what do you become? For me, the world of prison taught me about humanity's darkest corners. I've seen violence, corruption, and cruelty up close. But I've also seen resilience, resourcefulness, and even kindness in the most unexpected places. This is where Hercules' story and mine intersect, not in the details, but in the humanity. We've both walked through hell. We've both been shaped by systems bigger than ourselves, and we've both had to find our own paths in a world that often denies us choices. Hercules' story isn't just about one man. It's about the systems that shape us, the scars we carry, and the resilience that keeps us going. Next time on Secret of the World, we'll explore more untold stories, dive deeper into the human experience, and challenge the narratives we take for granted. Until then, remember, the world is full of secrets. Sometimes the only way to understand them is to look beyond the surface. Politics don't just create legends like Hercules, they shape the lives of countless others. I know this because I've walked that same path, descended through my own layers of hell, and emerged with scars that speak of survival in a system designed to crush us. Hercules' life, like mine, is one born of chaos. In the prisons of Indonesia, where corruption ruled and survival demanded brutality, I saw the same world that shaped him. Overcrowded cells, 20 or more people crammed into spaces meant for half that number, the food barely edible, and the structure of power within the walls mirroring the gang-like hierarchies outside. These weren't just prisons, they were breeding grounds for violence, desperation, and adaptation. As a child, I was thrown into this world, accused of crimes I couldn't even comprehend at the time. I remember the faces of hardened criminals, the sting of their words, the weight of their actions. I wasn't a child in their eyes. I was just another pawn in a broken system. In those dark cells where the only sunlight came through iron bars, I learned what it meant to endure. I learned what it meant to survive when survival wasn't guaranteed. Hercules and I both witnessed the same atrocities, the same cruelty of men against men. But the difference? He rose through it. He adapted and became a symbol of something larger, a force that even the powers that oppressed him couldn't ignore. I see in him a reflection of my own fight, my own struggles, but where I sought to escape, he sought to command. And it's not just about us, it's about a system that takes the vulnerable and crushes them, about a history that ties us all together. What happened in Europe, in the Middle East, in Africa, it all reached us. It's the same story, told in different languages across different lands. The purge of communists, the violence of religion, the greed of politics, all of it shaped our lives, our identities, and the layers of hell we've had to endure. Through Hercules' story and mine, we see the humanity that's left behind in the wake of destruction. We see how systems create criminals, how survival becomes a crime, and how resilience is the ultimate rebellion. The ripple effects of what happens in Europe, the Middle East, or Africa always reach us. Their politics, their wars, their greed, it all connects to us, even if we're thousands of miles away. The decisions made by those in power, the moves played on the global chessboard, come at a cost we often bear. Take Indonesia, for example. We've experienced these ripples firsthand. During the Cold War, the purge of communists in the 1960s saw rivers run red with blood. It's hard to say how many lives were lost, hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions, yet the world barely blinked. Why? Because for the powers in the West, Indonesia wasn't a nation of people. It was a piece on the board, a place to exploit, a resource to control, a strategic location to outmaneuver the other side. And this isn't just history. Look at the chaos in the Middle East. Look at the devastation in Africa. The politics of destruction don't stop there. They come to us in Southeast Asia, wrapped in the same lies. For decades, Western countries have used us, not as allies, not as equals, but as pawns. They plant their spies, fund their agendas, and manipulate our struggles for their benefit. They never cared how many lives their games destroy. But the truth is, we don't even need to look at the geopolitics to see the damage. Religion alone has left its own scars. Think about how many people have died, not for faith, but because of it. People killing in the name of God, spilling blood over interpretations, over power. I'm not pointing fingers at Muslims, Christians, or any religion. I don't believe in any of them. What I believe in is what I see, the destruction, the killing, the damage, the loss of humanity. We're supposed to be better, aren't we? Yet here we are, watching history repeat itself over and over. The scars get deeper, the losses get greater, and all the while we pretend like we can't see what's right in front of us. Most people only know one side of Indonesia, Bali. When they think of my country, they think of its beaches, its temples, its nightlife, and the endless stream of tourists who flock there every year. But Bali is just one tiny part of what Indonesia really is. What most people don't realize is that Bali's beauty and appeal are sustained by the blood, sweat, and sacrifices of its people. About 99% of the Bali they see and enjoy is for tourists. The locals, they're the ones working endlessly behind the scenes to make it all happen, often for far less than they deserve. It's harder for outsiders to understand the complexities of a place like Bali, or Indonesia as a whole, when they only see the surface. They see smiling faces, hospitality, and vibrant culture. And yes, the people of Bali are some of the kindest, most resilient people you'll ever meet. But don't mistake kindness for weakness. or assume every face you see is wearing a genuine smile. Human beings are complex. Just because you're surrounded by paradise doesn't mean life is easy. The struggles of the Balinese people are real. Struggles to survive in a system that prioritizes tourism over their well-being. And when you think about it, isn't that just a reflection of humanity as a whole? If you think everyone is the nicest person, you're wrong. Beneath the surface, we're all just trying to navigate a world that's often unforgiving, where survival sometimes brings out the best in us, and other times, the worst. Let me take you inside the prison system in Indonesia. It wasn't just a place where you lost your freedom, it was a place where you lost your humanity. The law wasn't the law back then, it was the jungle. You survived if you could, and if you couldn't, you disappeared. I remember being locked up in a cell, one small, overcrowded room with over 20 people crammed inside. You couldn't move without bumping into someone else. And these weren't just regular people. Some were hardened criminals, men who had spent their entire lives living outside the law. I was just a kid, but that didn't matter. The system didn't care about your age or your story. Inside each cell, there was a hierarchy. The leader of the cell answered to the block leader, and the block leader answered to the guards. The guards? They didn't enforce justice. They enforced their own version of order, rooted in power and corruption. If you weren't part of the Big Eight, the ones in charge, you had no rights. You had no voice. You had a job to serve. And that could mean cooking for the leaders, even if it meant burning the only clothes you had to fuel a makeshift stove. They didn't care. It was survival of the fittest. The food, barely edible. Rice crawling with lice. Salted fish that was so disgusting we called it jacket fish because you'd peel off the skin just to choke it down. And if you didn't eat, you didn't survive. But the violence was worse. People were beaten, raped, traded like they were nothing. If you had no one to protect you, no one to bribe the guards, you were prey. I remember the counts, standing with your hands up while they ticked you off like cattle. You weren't a person, you were a number. And yet, the violence wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the corruption. It was everywhere, hidden in plain sight. The guards made deals. Lives were traded for money, for favors. If your family couldn't pay, you stayed. If you had nothing to give, you were nothing to them. This wasn't a system meant to rehabilitate. It was a machine designed to break you, to crush your spirit. And for many of us, it worked. But this story isn't just about the prison system. It's about a country, a nation called Indonesia. My homeland, where the above stories are not just personal, they're systemic. They're woven into the very fabric of how the country has been shaped by history. Indonesia, the largest archipelago in the world, with its rich culture and abundant resources, was a victim of global greed. What happened in Europe centuries ago? The wars, the colonial empires, the carving up of lands that didn't belong to them, all of it left scars on nations like mine. The greed of a few created suffering for millions. The Dutch came to our shores, exploiting our spices, our land, and our people. They built their wealth on our backs. And even after independence, the effects lingered. The systems they put in place, the structures of power and corruption, they didn't disappear. They just changed hands. And then came the Cold War, the anti-communist purges, the violence, and the military rule. What happened in the world, the ideological battles between the West and the East, played out in bloody fashion in Indonesia. Millions of innocent lives were lost. And those of us who survived, we were left to navigate the wreckage. The world doesn't like to talk about it. But the truth is out there. The undeniable proof that what they did in Europe, in America, in Japan, their greed, their wars, their so-called progress, left nations like mine to pick up the pieces. We were the victims, and we still are. This is the story of Indonesia, a story of resilience, yes, but also a story of pain, of oppression, of systems designed to keep us in our place. And it's a story that needs to be told. This ties your personal Secret of This World, the podcast where we uncover untold stories and hidden truths shaping the world around us. I'm your host, Jason Hutagalung, and I'm thrilled to have you with me today. In our last episode, we explored the rise of Hercules, the notorious Indonesian gangster who emerged from the chaos of East Timor. But today, we're shifting gears to focus on someone whose life intertwined with Hercules, a man whose influence stretches across Indonesia's military, political, and even underground worlds. This is the story of Prabowo Subianto, a military commander, a political powerhouse, and a man whose legacy continues to spark debate. For better or worse, he's the force that helped shape Hercules' rise and Indonesia's modern history. Let's rewind to the 1970s. A young Prabowo Subianto enrolled at the Indonesian Military Academy in Magelang in 1970. By the time he graduated in 1974, he was already making a name for himself as a sharp and ambitious officer. Fast forward to 1976. At just 26 years old, Prabowo became the youngest commander of the Nanggala Commando Unit, part of Kopassus, Indonesia's elite special forces. This was no small feat, and his first major mission? East Timor, a place where conflict, ambition, and controversy collided in ways that would shape the rest of his career. East Timor, 1978. Prabowo's unit was tasked with tracking down Nicolau dos Reis Lobato, East Timor's first prime minister and a key figure in the Fretilin independence movement. That mission ended with Lobato's death, a tactical success for Prabowo, but at a staggering human cost. As the conflict wore on, allegations of atrocities began to surface. One dark chapter tied to Prabowo's name is the Kraras massacre, where over 200 civilians were killed. Survivors and human rights groups accused his men of orchestrating the violence, though Prabowo denied being there. The truth? Still murky. But the accusations? They've left a lasting stain. By the 1990s, Prabowo had climbed the ranks to command Kopassus Group 3. His methods were strategic but brutal. He leaned on militias, covert operatives, and even squads infamously known as ninjas to suppress East Timorese resistance. During his tenure, reports of human rights abuses, torture, extrajudicial killings, terror campaigns spiked. While these tactics helped Indonesia maintain control, they left deep scars on the people of East Timor and cast a dark shadow over Prabowo's career. In 1998, Indonesia was in turmoil. The Asian financial crisis hit hard, protests erupted nationwide, and Suharto's 30-year regime was crumbling. Prabowo, now head of the Army Strategic Reserve Command, or Kostrad, was in the thick of it. His troops were accused of orchestrating kidnappings and violence targeting democracy activists. Critics say it was a desperate bid to suppress dissent and secure power as Suharto's regime collapsed. When Suharto resigned, the fallout for Prabowo was swift. He was dismissed from the military, marking the end of his career in uniform. But this wasn't the end of Prabowo Subianto, not by a long shot. After his military career ended, Prabowo reinvented himself. He entered the world of business and politics, founding the Gerindra Party, which would become a major political force in Indonesia. But even as he pursued political power, Prabowo maintained his ties to figures like Hercules. Hercules, once a loyal soldier in East Timor, had risen to prominence as a gangster. Thanks to Prabowo's support, Hercules transitioned from the criminal underworld to a more legitimate political role, founding a pro-Prabowo organization called Grib Jaya. It's a relationship that underscores the blurred lines between politics, the military, and the underworld in Indonesia. Today, Prabowo Subianto is Indonesia's president, a testament to his resilience and influence. But his past, it's never far behind. Allegations of human rights abuses, his controversial tactics in East Timor, and his political maneuvers during Suharto's fall continue to haunt his legacy. Yet on the international stage, he's been welcomed as a leader, a nationalist and strongman, whose past has, in many ways, been brushed aside. For some, Prabowo is a hero who shaped Indonesia's future. For others, he's a figure tied to its darkest chapters. Either way, his story and his ties to Hercules reveal the complex, often murky intersection of military power, politics, and the underworld. That's all for this episode of Secret of This World. Thanks for tuning in and exploring these hidden layers of history with us. Next time, we'll dive into another story that challenges the way we see the world. Until then, stay curious. Remember, history is never black and white.